All right, and welcome back to the Expert Witness podcast interview series. Our guest today is Marker Platt. Marker is the owner of Markerson Engineering and Marker Forensic and Expert Consulting. He has earned bachelor's and master's degrees in civil and structural engineering with a minor in mathematics. He's passed both the professional engineering exam and the more rigorous national structural engineering exam, as well as the project management professional exam. He's currently licensed in 20 states and pursuing additional licensure in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Over the last decade and a half, he has worked in a variety of industries and designed power line structures, water towers, deep foundations, landscape structures, residential structures, commercial structures, and industrial structures. In addition to his design work, Marker has conducted over 600 forensic investigations, ranging from hurricane impact to failed trade show video screen walls. He has also testified at numerous depositions and trials as an expert witness. His motto is excellence through integrity, and he applies the work ethic he learned growing up on a cattle ranch, along with the highest quality writing, mathematical expertise, logical analysis, and application of engineering principles to every project he pursues, whether design, forensic, expert witness, or a combination. When he is not working, Marker loves rock climbing and having adventures with his wife and 8 children. Marker, we're glad to have you here and welcome to the show.
Thank you, David.
First question I always like to ask is, how did you get into expert witness work? It's not something that kids normally talk about wanting to be when they grow up. So how were you introduced to it, and how did you start working in this field?
So that is correct for me. As a kid, I had no idea this existed, other than reading Sherlock Holmes. That was about the extent of my exposure to this field. And by the way, my kids will not be among those. They are very aware because I share funny stories with them all the time about this work. But yeah, for me, not as a kid. In fact, my first exposure to this was when I was an undergrad student at BYU. We would have weekly seminars, and one of the one I remember the most, and the most interesting one, was a forensic engineer. He spoke about some projects that I'd never even considered would be part of what I could do, and I was fascinated by what he did, and I thought this is something I want to hopefully get an opportunity to do. It didn't turn out that way. For the first 5 years of my career, I designed power lines. And then I decided I wanted to pursue the national SE exam, as you mentioned, that I passed. And I found out in order to pass that, I needed to switch industries. So I began designing residential and landscape structures, and then in commercial structures. And then when I got into commercials, I started doing a lot of retrofits. I started taking a lot of existing buildings and trying to make them, and enhance them or renovate them. And I also started study. We did a study of churches that were not had a lot of seismic deficiencies in California. In fact, one of them, when I was investigating it, luckily it was not on a Sunday, so no one was there. But I was looking at the attachment of a big chandelier type thing that proceeded to detach and crash onto the congregation that wasn't there below, onto the empty pews, I guess. So that was my first experience with failure. Luckily, no one was hurt.
While you were inspecting it?
It fell down while I was inspecting it.
Oh man.
And that was, full disclosure, that was probably more due to the inspector than the lack of an adequate connection. I may have loosened something I shouldn't have. But so that was my first experience with a failure. And soon after that, I got an opportunity to do forensic work full time. I started work with a forensic firm, and I worked for them for 3 years, did over 600 forensic investigations. And at the very end of that tenure with that company, I was finally deposed for the first time, and found that I both, this was enjoyable to me, but also I learned a lot of work that I needed to do to to be successful as an expert. So I attended the SEEK training. They hold SEEK is a expert witness firm founded and run by attorneys. They teach us how to testify, write reports, etc. So I've attended their training, bought their materials, and try to keep up on continually training and improving as an expert and as a report writer. So that's a kind of a long explanation. So for me, it was a series of just opportunities and interests and lots and lots and lots of studies.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you were getting into this, were there any barriers or obstacles you had to overcome, or did the cases, come slowly, or have you been in high demand from day one?
So the biggest barriers that I have encountered really were, like I said, at the end of the forensic company I worked with, I was beginning to get deposed, and I found that I felt constrained, within the company I was in. That was one reason I left. The company I was with was only doing forensic work. I didn't do design work for 3 years, and that's, in my opinion, I'll get into this later, but that's an essential part of being an engineer, is being able to create things. Studying failure all the time, I felt was handicapping me. So I switched firms, and the next firm I was with eventually didn't want me to do forensic work anymore. And in fact, they told me I couldn't, so I had to leave that firm. And I just found that there was a lot of complications trying to merge design work and forensic work, which I felt were both essential to what I wanted to do. And so the biggest constraint really for me was, to really do what I wanted to do, I had to just leave and try to find my own firm. Not to say that every engineer has to do that, but for my particular case, that was the barrier. Since doing that, cases have come in steadily. It's pretty random how they come in or when, but they do come in. And so I guess the biggest barrier that for me that was removed was I was able to finally merge these two parts of engineering in a way that I felt was most effective and worked best for me. So that's why I started my company, Markerson Engineering, about 7 months ago. I felt I could better choose whether a case was suitable, better decide how to conduct the case, and whether or not I could do it well. And so I founded a company that does both design and forensic work on purpose, and I get a good deal of both. I feel like a good design engineer is made better by studying structural failure. Say by the same token, a forensic engineer, is made better by staying sharp with continuing to design and create, in my case, in my field, buildings and other structures. Incidentally, so I think you mentioned I have a lot of children in your introduction. 4 of those are daughters, and they're all 4 of them, except for the baby, are in either dance or gymnastics, and some of them are in both. And we found that, the ones that did both were better at both. Kind of the same token, certain fields complement each other, and I feel like design engineering and forensic engineering are definitely in that category.
Yeah, I would agree. We found the same thing in our company, that doing both tends to build upon itself and make you better in both areas. Very good. All right. So can you tell us what types of cases you commonly work on? And, without sharing any confidential information, can you give us a couple examples maybe of cases that you've worked on, or the types of situations that call for your expertise?
Sure. Yeah. So as a civil and structural forensic engineer and expert witness. The type of cases I study fall into three categories, with a few exceptions, but the majority of them fall in these categories in an order of most common. The first category is failures due to natural disasters, or even just not necessarily disasters, but just natural forces. So I've studied failures arising from wind, hail, snow, flood, other sources of moisture intrusion, and then the more exotic ones: hurricanes, tornadoes, lightning strikes, fire, and even a volcano study. Wildly, I got to do some volcano studies. Those are the vast majority of the type of cases that I work on. Second category would be, failures due to us, right? To man-made disasters. There's no shortage of those. For example, construction defect. There's also design defect. Some specific ones. I studied a case where someone was running a hose off a roof like all day and all night. Just, I don't know why, but that's what we found was there was a chronic problem of running water off the roof. I've seen roofs hit by hammers, hit by vehicles, usually cars, tiles broken by stepping on them. I did one case involving a garbage truck that hit porte cochere at a house. I'll share a little more detail because this one's a really interesting one. So I was not the first engineer that was retained. This homeowner had she was kind of remote, so this garbage truck would come by once a week, and it happened that one week the arm on the back of the truck hadn't been put down. So as it was going through, she was actually watching it. She saw it hit the top of her porte cochere. It was a log house, and so this garbage truck hit the top of her porte cochere, and she said that there was a very loud noise and shaking of her house. And the garbage truck then just continued through and picked up its garbage and went on its way. So the garbage truck insurance company hired an engineer who came out and took a look at the house, the porte cochere. He found that the only damage that he could see was that the log had been scraped off. So and actually been split somewhat, but so a piece of the log that it hit it head on, so it basically split it like an axe, and it took off a chunk of the log. And he said that was it. That was what the damage had been done, and they were gonna give her a little bit of money to fix her log. She wanted a second opinion, so company I was working for at the time, they were contacted by her insurance, and I went out and saw the same things, and got the same story, looked at the log that had been damaged. And then I sat down on her porch for a while, and I just said, so there's one thing that's not adding up here. The way she describes this garbage truck hitting her porte cochere, how shaking, loud noise, all that seems to not be accounted for by a split log. I've split logs growing up, like you mentioned, on a ranch. There's not a lot of shaking or anything that comes along with that.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm stuck, sometimes I'll just share openly. I ask for help. I believe in, I'm a religious man. I believe in that we can get help for what we need. So in this case, I did. I asked to see what I wasn't seeing, and I went out to the end of her porte cochere and started to look at how everything was connected, and I found that a bolt had been pulled both through and up into the wood, and the bolt was attached to a cable which was attached to the top of her porte cochere. So I took a step back, way back, and looked at the house, and I saw this. Looking at it from that perspective, the whole thing was leaning. what had actually happened was that the force from that garbage truck had been transferred all the way down to her foundation and ripped this bolt through and up into the wood and caused the whole thing to lean. And so, I put together my report and sent it in, and not surprisingly, the other expert wrote back and said, everything that you just saw was due to the wind. Um, and so this time I took out all of my detailed wind sources and calculated how much wind you would need to be able to create that type of failure. Turns out the only way you could generate that much wind is with a nuclear explosion. So I wrote that and sent it back, and that was last I heard of that until later on. This homeowner wrote me years later and said, "Thank you for your report. They finally came around and fixed everything." Right. So, that was a really gratifying for me, to say, if we dig a little deeper and we, ask for help when we need it, and are willing to, to do a rigorous study, we can actually really help people. And that's what I love about this field. I feel like I get to help people. Most of the time when I'm retained, it's because someone is in a very hard situation.
Mhm.
There's usually I would say for them, a disaster that's happened. And a big part of mitigating that disaster is getting to the bottom of it, finding out what caused it, finding out how to fix it. That's another reason I do design work. It's important to give them the problem, but I also like giving them the solution. So a good part of my projects lead into a retrofit, or at least pointing them in the direction where they need to go to get a retrofit or a fix for the problem. And then so that was a second category. The third category is still in the man-made field, but it's more in the soft, so kind of the softer aspects, I guess, of building and maintaining our environment. Project management. I mentioned I have a project management certification. I've testified at cases involving cost estimating. I've been consulted on cases, although I didn't end up being retained. But there's disasters that come from bad management. There was actually one case. There was a man who was electrocuted on a power line, and it was coming down to what were best management practices followed. So as a power line engineer, I was very aware of management practices, because they can mean the difference between life and death. And in this case, they did. So there's that's another field where, not as commonly, but I still get a fair number of cases involving both management or building code interpretation, or correctly designing things. So those are the areas that I work in. So there's a wide variety of situations, I guess, that call for for my expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Those some good stories. So do you find that most of your cases are local, or do you do a lot of work nationwide? And is that typical, I guess, for a civil structural engineer?
So yeah, so a civil forensic engineer, as I described, our biggest, the biggest source for our forensic investigations are natural disasters. So those happen where they happen. With hurricane studies, it's the Gulf, the Gulf states. I'm licensed in most of those states on purpose, so I can be available to do hurricane studies, which I've done. In fact, this one of the Virgin Islands that I'm getting licensed for was originated from a hurricane, two hurricanes, in fact, within a week of each other, that wiped out the electrical infrastructure at the on this island. And so I have a pretty wide geographic base. I'm licensed in 20 states, and I've done work in most of those, whether forensic or design work. And so I keep a wide base, but I also do a lot of local work, just because there's plenty of it, and it's more cost effective for clients and easier for them and me to do something that's close by. But I do both on purpose and by necessity to have enough work. I have a wide geographic area I work in.
All right, very good. So what is it about expert work or forensic work that you really enjoy? Why do you do this type of work?
So going back to to college days, I loved getting into the details of things and studying how things really worked. I felt like in college I got really good into the theoretical version of things. Felt like I understood things pretty well. But after, starting to get into failure analysis, I realized that the only way to really know something is to see it actually in action, see how it fails and even test it. So I love getting satisfied with how things really work. And I feel like in forensic and expert witness work, there's a high demand for that. And so, I found it's a great niche for me. I love studying detail. I love shedding light on something that seemed really obscure at the beginning, and being able to do that using the scientific method and, asking for help, like I mentioned before. Um, I find a lot of joy in uncovering truth and learning truth. So that's what I love about it.
Very good. So have you ever been reviewing information for a case and diving into the details and find out that you're definitely on the wrong side of the case? And if you have, what did you do?
So yes, I have found that the conclusions I was coming to would not actually help my client, knowing what they were hoping for. But an interesting thing, David, is my clients have never been angry with me for giving my opinions. They've been disappointed in the results, that it wasn't how they wanted, but they were not disappointed with me, I guess. Like they didn't shoot the messenger, right? I haven't had that experience yet. I may at some point. But so far, gratefully, I've worked with a lot of great clients and people, and they're really after the truth. In fact, I try to fill out before I take a client if they're really interested in the truth or if they're interested in someone saying what they want to say. And as long as there's that understanding up front, I have in my agreement very clear language that my findings may not benefit. They could actually go against your position. And so therefore, I'm upfront, and I had that discussion too with them along the way, especially if the study is going in a direction, that may not be the direction they wanted. I try and be very open and upfront, and I haven't had any big issues yet with that approach. And so, yeah, being on the wrong side, I guess, would only mean not being truthful and honest. So I have never had to be on that wrong side.
Yeah, absolutely. And we find the same thing that a lot is that the attorneys really just want to know whether or not the facts support their case. And as an expert, it's not your job to win or lose a case, but just to present the facts as you see them. So that's good. I find that most attorneys really appreciate an honest and upfront opinion rather than trying to lead them on and make them think they've got a great case so you can bill more hours, and then when you get to deposition or trial you kind of flip-flop and and they end up spending a whole bunch of money on something that they're never going to win. So honesty and integrity are always appreciated, I find. All right, so no job is perfect, in my mind at least. Is there anything about the expert witness industry or this type of work that bothers you or rubs you the wrong way?
So I would say that, as a business owner, as well as an expert witness. Probably the most challenging part for me, at least, especially as a new business owner, has been um, right up front with a client, being able to discuss and negotiate business value. Not everyone sees the value right away, or even after a discussion about what we do, you and I and others as expert witnesses. And a lot of times, frankly, I may not be able to take a case simply because it doesn't make business sense. It may be a very interesting, incredible forensic study, which is why I do this, right, and why I love what I do. But if it's not something that I can do and run a business with, I'm not able to take the case. And so there's some cases, there's some situations out there where there's a homeowner or someone else that's really in need, but I can't give them free work. And plus there's costs associated with testing, there's costs associated with sub-consulting. It's in this line of work, there's really not a lot of opportunity to do it pro bono. And so that I found as a business owner and a expert witness, I've had to learn a lot about how to deal with establishing up front. This is not going to be this could be expensive, especially to get to the bottom of it. And frankly, there's a lot of forensic engineers, investigators that do stuff for much more inexpensively. And I find them a lot on the other side when I take cases. And often, in fact, I'll be retained because of a poorly written or not adequately researched forensic report. I'm dealing with a couple of those right now, where the homeowner's in a position that she's in because of some reports that were not correct, that the methodology was wrong, or they were not tested. And so there's a little bit of I've found, in this industry, there are a lot of misconceptions that this should be cheap and that it should not cost much. And I found that not to be the case. To really do it well, sometimes it takes testing, and it takes other expensive things. And so that's been the biggest challenge, really, is being able to agree on both on the depth of study that's needed and also on the cost. I won't take a case unless I can do it well. So that's been probably the biggest challenge, is just going up against that.
Yeah, that's interesting. We find that there's some experts that do a really good job and put a good report together, and some that maybe do it quickly and don't take the right amount of time. And frankly, for me, it's always nice when the expert on the other side does a really good job, because it's just so much easier to work with. It's one of the things that we say in our office is that it's hard to argue with stupid. And I hate to say it, but sometimes, arguments that get made are kind of stupid, at least from an engineering perspective. So I always appreciate when people take the time and energy to do things right and make a good report. All right, so after reports, oftentimes will be in depositions, and a lot of times those are thought of as serious and well planned out events where the attorneys have a whole list of questions that they're asking right off the paper. But I've found that isn't always the case. I'm curious, have you had a particularly lighthearted or funny interaction during a deposition or trial, or something that you've heard about that you would share?
So yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. There's things that would tickle me and I would laugh about at almost every trial or deposition that I've been at. The first case I did that went to trial, me and another expert were retained And he was the other expert. It was a construction expert, so he had a wide variety of experience, both as a construction worker and as an expert. And we were both deposed, and he was deposed first. And so before my deposition, they sent me his transcript so I could kind of fill out what type of questions the attorney was going to ask me. So I could maybe be better prepared. Turns out she asked me completely different questions for the most part, but what I got out of that review of his deposition, and I tried to imagine him how he would say this, but his responses, by the time I was done, I was laughing out loud at some of the things he said. For example, this attorney, she did ask me and him both the same question. She asked, "What are your credentials as a weather researcher?" This was a case involving wind damage and water intrusion to a house, and so both of us had mentioned and in one level of detail or another what the weather conditions were that day. And so she asked him, what is your weather research? Did you go to school as a meteorologist? Did you go to did you get a degree in weather? Did you go to, how can you call yourself a weather expert? And he said, this is written in his deposition, he's like, "Well, I've lived on this rock for 60 years. I've been wet, I've been dry, I've been blown about, I've been cold, I've been hot." And he went through it all, and that was his qualification as a weather researcher. And I thought that was an excellent response to that question. I think I had a different response, but he'd already taken the best one. But
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I loved his response. I wish I could have seen him at trial. They didn't let us observe the other expert getting cross-examined at trial, but that was one thing I regretted, was I didn't get to see how he responded to the questions at trial.
Oh, that's great. All right, so if you were going to give someone who had just been retained on their first case one piece of advice, what advice would you give them?
So hopefully this person would ask my advice before they've been retained on their first case, because I would say before even thinking about testifying as an expert, I would say make sure that you study failure and you study how to study failure, in whatever field that's in. I know engineering field the best. As an expert, we're always called to, I'd say most of the time, if not all the time, we're called to study failure. And so being able to systematically and scientifically study failure and then present your findings in a well-written and well thought out report is the biggest factor in your success, because you can learn the skills to testify, to how to conduct yourself in a deposition or a trial, but if your report's bad, that's not going to save you. If your study was not done right, if you don't know what you're doing when it comes to studying failure and forensic work that leads to expert work, then you're going to have a hard time. Instead of being a pleasant or a kind of a funny even experience sometimes. Not to say that to back up as a testifying expert, I take my work very seriously. This isn't like I'm up there trying to be a clown or anything, but I do see the funny side of things. But to be able to enjoy testifying at all, you need to have done your homework up front and been able to do a well-written, thought out report. So I would say, before being retained on your first case, make sure that you are confident in your investigative abilities.
Yeah, absolutely. It always helps to be an expert in the thing that you're giving expert testimony about, and to take the time and effort to have something to base your opinions on. So very good. I totally agree. So what do you find makes you a good or effective expert witness? What helps the expert to be persuasive?
Um, so the first thing is, I don't try to be somebody else or act, like differently, I guess. I also, do trainings. It's just my attorneys help prepare me for the upcoming deposition or the upcoming trial. I do the SEEK trainings. They give great trainings on how to write a report, how to testify at trial and a deposition, basically all aspects of what an expert does.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I find taking their counsel and doing their role playing is very important. Um, and just to be persuasive is to be very, very confident in your conclusions, to have done your homework again, going back to doing a good investigation first. If you're sold on your conclusions and you're solid on them, then the judge or jury will know that, the attorneys will know that. You don't have to try and manufacture or try and pretend like you know what's going on if you actually do know what's going on. Um, so the more convinced I am of my case, of my opinions and my findings, then being persuasive comes naturally. Being able to clearly back those up comes naturally.
Yeah, very good. All right, so I find that most experts would like to be involved in more cases. What have you found to be the most effective marketing technique, and what's the best way to get new cases in your mind?
So the biggest obstacle is, for an attorney and an expert to find each other. Um, there's definitely a need for my field, for the areas that my areas of expertise. Getting your name out there is the biggest challenge. I have a website. I also have a online listings. I have a Seek directory listing. I'm listed on Expert Witness Direct. I have my CV and experience up there. Um, that's been helpful in getting occasional cases. Um, Recently, I found talking with a website and a internet marketing company that Google Ads, if you can get, you know, um, up, be the first or second or even the third listing when someone searches about your field, that's a very effective way for attorneys to find you.
Mhm.
I'm recently starting to explore that as a way to get in front of attorneys. Probably the most effective way is to do really well on your cases so that the attorney that retained you will tell their friends about you, or they'll use you again, or at least you'll get your name will get out there in the circles that they run in. And I've had a number of cases. Probably most of them have come from that, just from having done well and having another attorney contact me based on what his friends told them about their experience.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a small world, smaller than most people realize. Attorneys talk to each other a lot, and so doing a good job on one case can really bring in a lot of business just from word of mouth. So very good. So if there are any attorneys listening to this or people that, you know, want to refer you, how can people find you? How can they get a hold of you?
Um, so my website is, if you just type in markerforensicexpert.com into your Google or search engine, it'll hopefully my website will pop up, and it has my contact information, phone number, email address, and also the areas of expertise that I work in, that I've testified in, that I'm qualified in. So probably the best way would be to start with my website. You can also search for me on Seek or Expert Witness Direct. Those all have my CV and contact information. And my email address, mplatt, MPLATT at Marcorsen, MARCORSEN.com. I'd encourage them to look at my website and see if what I have, what my experience is what they would would need for their particular case.
All right, very good. Well, Marco, this has been fun. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and stories with us. And we look forward to talking with you again in the future.
All right, thank you, David.